Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good? Everything is good over here too? Yes, here we are. And for those of you who asked, yes, I am going to do again. I'm gonna do the Mardi Gras show. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, I've been working on it. Been trying to dig up some ghost stories around Mardi Gras. I've got a couple of, and like I said in the last show, this year Mardi Gras falls on Tuesday the 13th, and everybody thinks of Friday the 13th. Among Hispanics, the bad day is Tuesday the 13th. But anyway, it's the 13th. So that's going to be the main motif behind the Mardi Gras show is superstition. Superstition around the 13th, whether it's a Friday the 13th or just the number the 13th, you'd be surprised. You're going to see when I present it how it's not even the Friday the 13th, it's the 13th thing, where even supposedly grown-ups that don't believe in superstition, when it comes right down to it, they do. But you'll see what I mean. So don't forget to tune in for the Mardi Gras show next week. So let's get on to the good part, guys. This is the first time this gentleman has come to Stories of the Supernatural. His name is Rick Garner, and he is with Unexplained Cases, established in 1999. It all began in Jackson, Mississippi on WJTV TV as a local broadcast news feature called Unexplained, which ran from 1999 until 2004. This innovative feature was the brainchild of Darren Dito and Rick Garner, who today are recognized as early pioneers of the ghost hunting genre, winning them high praise and accolades, including as a Southeast Regional Emmy and 2 Associated Press Awards. In 2019, the concept was relaunched as Unexplained Cases and built on the original core principle of applying their unique style, combining broadcast journalism and storytelling with historical research and preservation to investigate, uncover, and document on a national scale all that is paranormal: hauntings, UFO sightings, cryptid encounters, cold cases, and much more. UC serves the living by documenting their stories, finding understanding of their paranormal encounters, and educating ourselves and the public on the paranormal. UC serves the dead by giving them a voice and sometimes experiencing their crossing over. We accomplish this through teamwork, working with other professionals, being thought leaders in the paranormal community, and effectively using existing and future technology. The work is featured in compelling video episodes, live interviews, and special events. Over the past few years, the UC team has grown to add Michael Chin as lead investigator and researcher, in addition to having the privilege to collaborate with several renowned paranormal investigators, including A&E's Ghost Hunters Daryl Marston, Mustafa Gatollari, sorry, I almost massacred that last name, Brandon Alvis, Brian Murray, and Richel Stratton, as well as Malia Miglino from YouTube's Macabre Mondays and Grave Hunter. Timothy J. Sepala adds his years of storytelling and print journalist skills to our team as a correspondent in Detroit. Jim Birchall joins our team from New Zealand, where his print journalist and podcasting skills will help open international cases. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Rick?
I am fantastic, and I appreciate the chance to be able to chat about all
On the
things
contrary,
too.
it is. You know what? And you know why I'm excited? Because
Mhm.
I tell everybody, I was doing investigations back in the 1990s. This is before the age of the reality show thing.
Oh yes.
I tell everybody, for those of you that were born later, you had to pay to develop film. Back then,
Hmm.
there was no digital cameras where you could like, oh, that delete that picture, that's no good.
Oh yeah.
So,
And in some cases, I kind of feel like maybe even that whole process there. Besides there just being a nice feel to it, I sometimes wonder if just old-fashioned film might even just capture things a little bit better than
oh yeah,
our
yeah,
digital
yeah. You spend that
counterparts.
up spending money sometimes for, especially if you were doing, just the black thing because nothing was really captured there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But and I've said it on my other interviews. There was a lot less gadgets, so for lack of you observed more.
Yes.
You were there instead of running around, whether the this and the that and the FLIR camera and this, you had to observe. Maybe after you took some temperature and stuff like that, and maybe a digital recorder maybe was something else that you had. You had to sit there and actually observe.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like, and I tell everybody, and I don't know if you had this experience. Um, After a while, you develop a feeling of. I said usually when something, whether it was going to be an occurrence or presence was going to come, it makes an announcement. There's something that shifts.
Hmm.
Let's say if you're in an empty room, obviously, or nothing's happening,
Right.
there's something even besides the, how everybody says, oh, I got goosebumps. No, no, I'm talking even beyond that. There's something that you feel it.
Hmm.
Your human body
Sure.
reacts to it,
Hmm.
and it's almost like an announcement that something's gonna not even manifest, but either something's entering, something's changing,
Oh,
in around you. Have you had that
absolutely.
experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and like you just said, it certainly can come in various forms in the sense that a lot of times, sure, there could be, I usually refer to them as the full body tingles, basically, because
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing if I tell you something creepy and your hairs on your arm stands up. Okay, that's one thing. But I mean, when every hair,
Yes.
basically, it's like you've come
Yes.
in contact with a live wire. Okay,
Yeah.
that's notable. But to your point, yeah, it's a lot of times I think it's described as a heaviness. And
Yes.
it's kind of like if something is if it's perfectly normal, maybe it's warm and fuzzy, but then you come into a space or in your example, you're sitting there for a while and it's warm and fuzzy,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, this heaviness just kind of descends, and maybe it's even quieter. You know,
Yes. Yes.
I,
I've noticed that there's a reduction in noise level. Even when it's quiet, all of a sudden it kind of like deadens.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I've been, especially when you like someplace like static for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and how your mind will wander, and you're like, and all of a sudden you yourself perk up, like, what is that? Like you all of a sudden something's different. You just don't know exactly what it is, but it's like, wait a,
Yeah.
you look
There's
around.
the perception. Mm-hmm.
Yes, something shifts. Um, God knows, some people don't realize sometimes that paranormal investigations. There's times it can be very boring when nothing's.
Well,
When you're like,
it goes to the point to where and I mean, there's obviously all sorts of paths that we can take. So of course, I
yeah.
look forward to the rabbit trails of the fluids, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like for example, even though in reading the bio, of course, we do have
Mhm.
content, but it's like I don't look at ourselves as content creators first. Now, some
Right.
folks may
Yes.
be, and that's fine. But generally speaking, if you looked at yourself as a content creator first, then you're probably not going to do what I've done before in some of our episodes, where I will actually show a huge by perception of a content creator.
Mhm.
10 minutes, for example, would be an eternity for some folks. But over that time, it's showing maybe there's something sped up. Maybe there's let's sit in this moment to basically just say, you know what, this is actually what it's like. Here
Yes,
it's
exactly.
it's not. There's not stuff that's happening constantly all the time, all
Sure,
throughout the night.
sure.
I mean, it may
Absolutely.
be hours, and there's one
Yes.
thing that's like, well, now that was weird. Was it
Right.
paranormal?
Maybe.
Maybe not.
Maybe
But
not.
but again, that's the whole illusion that all this programming has
Right. That. Yeah.
showed
Because of
us.
course, like you said, they're doing their content. They have to produce content. Because if
Yes.
not, everybody be like, forget this. You know what? There's a bunch of people just sitting in a room looking at each other.
Right.
Hey, did you hear that? Exactly.
Yes.
So yeah. Let me ask you, how did you get involved in this field?
So if we go back to basically 1999, I think you can appreciate, and anyone listening and viewing this basically can appreciate that their local TV station. Of course, at that time, broadcast was a little bit more king than certainly now. Streaming could probably be considered
Mm-hmm.
more king, but at that time, certainly, broadcast radio and TV, that was still the heyday, the time. And still today, you have local stations doing Halloween stories.
Sure. Yes.
Every
Mm-hmm.
time they have to go do their little spooky with the cheesy effects and let's make it creepy, and it's about
Yeah.
90 seconds and we're done. So of course, the CBS affiliate that Darren and I were at did the same thing. But about that time, we started thinking, what if we just took this a little further? Darren's has a history of being an investigative reporter. My background, less journalism, more production.
Mm-hmm.
But again, radio, TV, both of our backgrounds. It was like, well, why don't we actually let's go a little bit deeper. And so we created a series that was called just Ghost Hunt. Real inventive name right there. Let me tell you.
Hey, I mean,
It's sometimes simple is better, right?
yes,
It's
exactly.
and so all that we did is there were some local stories, and we just expounded it a little bit further by making it a little bit more of okay, here's this legend, let's have someone explain it. Let's work with a local ghost hunter to kind of like let's investigate it a little bit further. Can we collect some evidence? Can we figure out a little bit more what's going on? Still, it was getting a little bit deeper, but not as deep as what became Unexplained was. And Darren and I both just, for me, growing up, I always had a fascination in, frankly, ghost stories. Being in
Mm-hmm.
the South, to me, the South is full of stories and yarns and tall tales and urban legends, maybe more so than other areas. I like to think so anyway. And ghost stories, I feel like, are a part of history. It's kind of like here's this shred of truth, at least, about a
Mm-hmm.
person or a place or both. And maybe everything that kind of like over the years spirals from it might get a little bit long in the tooth, so to speak.
Right.
But at least there's a shred of truth that starts with it. And so they always fascinated me. I never really had any experiences per se that I can recall. Like some folks were like, well, this happened and it got me into it. I just had the fascination with the storytelling aspect. Darren, he had some experiences along with his fascination, a little bit more on the UFO side of things,
Okay.
but certainly with the concepts of hauntings. And so basically, we decided to approach the news director at the time and be like, you know what? Hey, can we do more investigative reports? Like, can we get actually really deeper and let's go into the historical, let's go to the archives, let's get
Yes.
old pictures, let's dig a little deeper and find out about this location, and let's get some people who live there, experience this or whatever, and pull
Mm-hmm.
together what became frankly 3, 4, 5 minute pieces, which in broadcast news terms that's a whole block, which
Okay.
never happens. Like your average story is about 90 seconds, 60, 90 seconds tops. So for us to have that leeway to expand it was pretty amazing. And it allowed us to be able to tell some interesting stories. And of course, that's where, we were blessed to be recognized by the AP. Also,
So I was gonna say, I take it that it took off.
it took off. It was fun. It was nice. People at
Yeah.
the time were like, they tuned in for it. We did one a month. That was, since we did so much work on them, it was basically just churning out so that we could be able to have one
Yes.
unexplained each month. And then we of course we were tackling the different concepts, basically conspiracies, UFOs, etc. And we put together at least our hauntings ones into a half-hour special, and
Okay.
that's the one that we got recognized with a regional Emmy for. But a brief story on that would be, so that came out in 2001, and
Hmm.
that date may not necessarily, that year may not immediately ring home to anyone until I say September of the 11th.
Oh yeah.
And for us, we had already produced this special, but at that time, folks were like, okay, do we really need to like air a special that's talking about hauntings and death? And since we've had this going on in September, the month before,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
and so it became a serious conversation because there were a lot of towns that were literally canceling Halloween because it was just like, we can't do
Right.
this.
They would think it was too morbid or something like
Yeah,
that, or
it was too much to do, and so we had that, and so basically we all just finally just kind of settled on, you know what? Everyone's been glued to the TV. Everyone's been seeing this and had this.
hmm.
This is a chance to detach from that.
Yeah. I was gonna say this would, to me personally, it was like a distraction. It
Exactly.
was no, after seeing that and everything and the uncertainty, it was like, let me go back to like what you said, the tradition, Halloween. That's not gonna, nobody's gonna was gonna forget what happened. But
Right.
it was like distraction is what everybody I think was begging for, though.
Exactly, and that's what ended up happening. So we
Okay.
we we wondered, would anyone be like, "Oh, how could you guys do that?" or
Right.
whatever. Not a single complaint, and obviously, we didn't expect to get an award out of that, but that was pretty
Yeah.
special, basically, to have a regional Emmy that came about from
So
it.
let me
But
ask you, what did you do? Did you find like local places or historical places that were supposedly haunted, and you went in there and you did the story of like this is what supposedly is going on there? And
hmm yeah, so
oh,
so throughout, basically throughout 2000 and into 2001, like I said, we were hitting on different topics. So I compiled in this hour locations that we went to. Now, every one of them, like at the time, we had the pleasure of working. It was called the Ghost Preservation League out of Texas, Dallas, Texas, I believe. And Janice Rayleigh is who we're working with. And so Janice and her partner Barb basically helped guide Darren and I a lot in basically sharing their knowledge and their experience, and basically with the tools that they were using and the processes. So for us, we were kind of getting almost like a bit of tutelage there,
okay.
in being able to, here's these TV guys who weren't faking investigation. We were learning from actual investigators who, therefore, we could have them in these reports. A lot of times they would, we did stories in Louisiana, we did them in
Right.
Alabama and Mississippi. And so, Janice and Barb weren't at every single one of those, but they
Hmm.
were at several of them. And so, either we were letting them do the investigating and we were documenting, or we would take the experience that we had learned from them and plus on our own, and then we would apply it, as well as, of course, digging into the history of these spots.
Right, exactly. I think that's what a lot of people like is like, okay, i- is it how true is the story or the urban legend, for
Mhm.
example? Sometimes you find out the truth is worse than the urban legend.
Right, right. It's a lot of times, you'll read something, and like, to me, it's like, if I'll find something online, for example, and I'll be like,
Uh-huh.
okay, that sounds creepy, but I'm like, I want to know someone that's actually experienced it. And
Right.
the reality is, of course, you could say, well, what makes that person, for real, basically? Why? How do you know if they're fibbing to you? And I'm like, well, you do this long enough, you'll know if something is a little fishy. Basically,
Mhm.
any reporter is going to be able to say, something's off about
Well,
this.
you sound just like everything I've ever read about it. It's, like there's nothing there that I haven't read about. You know what I'm saying? Usually when people have firsthand experience, they can give you details that normally are not known per se.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that a lot of times, to me, the person who is 100% legit is going to be the person that you really have to convince, and they have to trust
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Because at that point, that's where a lot of times I'd say, listen, our goal here is, not to shine a light on you that makes you uncomfortable, to expose you, to make you feel judged.
Yes.
These are all the emotions and thoughts that go through a witness, someone who's experienced something, maybe even you could say a victim in some situations.
Yes.
If you're trying to preserve that information, I'm like, what's important to me is the story. So if that means I need to conceal your identity, change your name, change your voice, I can do all of that basically, and I can have, in my secret files locked away who you are. But the general public, they just need to know the story. And if that just ends up meaning that I don't even show your face and your hands are basically like on a table, or drawing something or whatever, that's fine, because the information is collected. Because so often, and we experienced this with, it was kind of a World War II bit of a conspiracy of like some murders that happened at a camp called Camp Van Dorn. Again, kind of an urban legend that I think that got way out of hand. But again, I believe that there was some truth there.
Okay.
There was some individuals who witnessed basically what they felt were these individuals that had gotten shot, basically black soldiers that had gotten shot, being put into boxcars to be taken away. Now, this is a pretty horrific story to tell, regardless of the time. Basically, I mean, that's kind of crazy anytime, or to think that the Army might be covering up something. But a book was written that just, to me and to us, to Daryl and I, really kind of blew things a bit larger than it was.
Okay.
In other words, we're talking about thousands of individuals, and it's like,
that's
feels a bit hard to cover up thousands.
Yeah. I was gonna say a couple maybe, but a
couple, six, half dozen, something like that. I mean, okay, that, again, what seems more plausible? The reason I bring that up is because there were some individuals who they shared the story, and I remember a specific. Betty was that's actually all we referred to her as, and that's all that comes to mind, because her name was Betty. And she was an older lady at the time, shared the story. Well, her family wanted to get that clip of her reliving that experience, because she also had told some other things, about like what she saw at the base and that time.
So in other words, she was an eyewitness. It's not like somebody told her. She was an actual eyewitness.
She was an eyewitness to something that, again, she's seeing a piece of the puzzle. She's also talking about Army life. There was another Malcolm Laplace. He was actually a regiment officer who was told to falsify documents.
Okay.
So Malcolm's grandson, I believe, reached out wanting that. And again, it's kind of like, where am I going with all this? It's meaning what's fascinating about doing this, and why I find this more enjoyable, is when you document these stories. And when family members reach out, because what a lot of times happens, I can speak for this myself, is if you haven't taken the time to record, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, whatever, like some experience that they've been in, and you lose that because they pass away, but then you find out that it does exist, well, of course you'd like to have that. And so for me, it's like, it's not about, okay, yeah, I'll give that to you if you give me $25 or something like that. It's like, it's not about that. It's called, absolutely, let me make you a copy, send it to you. Here's where you can download it or whatever, because it's preserving that history. That's what's important.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just a story that they retold, that maybe even sometimes a family thing, how much of this is really true or accurate? They come to find out, like, what, they were telling the truth. Like you said, even whatever their perception was of whatever was going on. But stuff like that, I think, is very, honestly, I think as far as unfortunately, some of these paranormal shows and everything, sometimes they revisit just the same old places after a while. So I
Yes.
think what you're describing, especially if you're able to even speak to people that either witnessed it or saw it, or like the grandson,
Hmm.
that gives it like this. I want to say like it's like a I don't know, it's like a human touch, but like this is real. This,
Yes. Yeah.
you know,
If there's a connection there, and I think that's where you get down to, a lot of times, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is what's your intent? Like, are
right.
you going into a spot, going into a location for the intent of helping someone because they're like, hey, listen, this is going on and I don't know what. Can someone help me? Or are you going into it because you're like, wow, I'd really like to see, like, what is the mystery? Like, why is this going on, basically? Or are you going into this as like, I want to have the crap scared out of me. That's why.
Right. Yeah. And I tell everybody that, especially after the reality shows, especially, I remember like you said, when you know the real ones,
Hmm.
even though you did a pre-interview, when you get there, and usually I would interview them off, you could tell that sometimes you had to like get them to talk because they'd be
Yes.
looking at you like,
Hmm.
are you going to crack up or are you going to tell me I'm crazy? Like
Right.
they weren't like, oh, because the chandelier swung. No, they'd be like, well, and it'd be like, come on, tell me it's okay. You have to reassure them. You could tell they were all right. Like I'm going to trust you with this information, which a lot of times is scared what out of them
Sure.
versus the person that's like, oh yeah, and then yeah, and it's like you said, they're all excited, and it's like,
Yes,
all right,
yes,
okay,
if you actually have a true experience that
yeah,
you cannot explain, you're
yes,
sitting here, it's rattling around in your head. And
yes,
matter of fact, I've had moments that I have documented myself that I know were crazy, and even I'm basically going like, could that have been this? Or could that have been that, or whatever,
yeah,
because that's just natural. You want to try to put the normal to
right,
something that is paranormal. And it's not a bad thing because too often people want to rush and say, oh, that's definitely this. And I'm like, well, hold on a second, time out.
yeah.
Did you check this? Did you check that? Did you think about
I
this?
know,
Did you
but nowadays
did you
everybody hears a weird noise in the attic, and the whole family runs out to sleep in the car because it's definitely a ghost. Once upon a time, people would be like, the last thing that they would even think of, they'd be like, no, it could be anything. It could be a squirrel or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the last thing. And I think that one of the most daunting things is number one, if it's a place where you live, you can't
Hmm.
escape it. Then
Hmm.
maybe number two is where you work.
Yes.
Okay. Those are the two places where people like were really getting, for lack of a better word, the real ones. They were anguished because it was like, I live here, I can't escape it. Or I
Yeah.
work here and I need my job, but this is happening
Hmm.
and I don't want to quit my job, but God, you
Yeah,
know,
and what I always found fascinating about those stories would be when we encountered, folks who, they've seen something, or they hear something every day or whatever. They see a little boy, or they see,
mhm,
handprints or something like that.
right,
I, who've been doing this since
right.
1999, kind of goes like, could I actually come to work every day and not be looking over my shoulder?
Oh no, I'd be jumpy. I'd be jumpy. Especially when you hear some of the and it's really funny because there's usually personnel that either open or close down a location.
Hmm.
Those are the ones that sometimes have these really unusual, and I'd be like, I don't know if I'd be like, after a while, this would be wearing me down. Like I'm not staying here by myself. Who's gonna close the shop with me or one of those deals?
Yeah,
Uh,
well, or that's also just like, one story that I recall. And again, this just shows you how times change. I always use this as an example because so often kind of get asked the question of like, okay, so what was your scariest moment? And I was kind of like thinking, well, to quantify, I can't necessarily say that I've ever been scared,
right.
because to me, have I been apprehensive? Have I been cautious? Have I,
Hmm.
laughed at? To me, scared is kind of like, well, a lot of times you see what I wonder if it's a little bit putting on in a lot of these programs where people are like running around basically acting crazy, and I'm like, okay, how do you even know what evidence you've collected
Right.
at
Yeah,
that point?
exactly.
But it's a place. It was called Marihope Mansion in Meridian, Mississippi, which
Okay.
in essence I keep it's not past tense, it's still there. But at the time we did this in 2000. So this location, bit of an antebellum home. Again, a couple of instances where you had a former resident, Eugene Gary, was a daughter who lived there, and was there was a claim that in essence she would knock a picture of herself off the wall. It eventually turned into a halfway house, and so there was this allegation of this gent called Marcus who committed suicide in an upper bedroom, and so he would walk around. You'd hear footsteps, but again, we're documenting stories of people, and they're willing to share the stories. So as crazy as they may sound, we're like, listen, we're not judging you because
right, this is a story.
You experienced this. We can't judge your experience. This is what you heard. But what was nice is we were allowed to stay there, and this was a case where it's kind of the little phrase of the little old ladies who ran the place were like, here's the keys. Good night. We don't stay here after dark.
So you're on your own. They're waiting for you guys to go, what? You mean you're going to leave us alone?
Yeah. So to me, the fact that we were left, they gave us the keys. Of course, we're a local TV station, so I think that gives you a little bit of extra street cred. Yeah. So, and it was like, we don't stay here. If y'all want to, you have permission. It's great, but just lock up when you're done. Of course, today, if you even had that pleasure, it would be like, can you give me like $1,000 or whatever?
Yeah.
But we stayed there, and the only time we left, because I think this was from, in essence, you're talking about around 6 o'clock at night. We got there and got set up and didn't leave until probably pushing about 5 in the morning. We left only one time to go down and get some snacks at like a local gas station kind of thing. And while we were there, it was one of those times where you wake up and you don't really think anything's going on. You feel like, was there a loud noise? And you're looking around and you're not really hearing anything, but it's like, was I dreaming? Was there something going on? Well, when we had a camera rolling on us, and so it was Darren, myself, and Rob, our photographer. And I remember Darren, who got woke up, said basically, what was that? And Rob was like, that's what woke me up. Now, what was heard sounded like somebody banging on the walls, like pop it. Yeah, and then I'm thinking, wait a minute, how in the world could any of us have even slept through that? But you wake up and it's like, you don't hear anything, right? So it's just kind of like you're thinking, was that real or whatever? Well, the tape proves what was going on. And then we also had at one point had gone upstairs, and this was after going to the filling station. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But upstairs, Darren and I walking around, and it was one of those classic great TV moments, basically, because I've got the camera with a light. He's he's in front of me, and we're just kind of like, checking out the place. And we hear upstairs, now we're on the top floor of this 3-story mansion. Above us is the roof. And so we start hearing clearly footsteps. There's
no attic. In other words, there's no attic. This is just a roof. Okay.
This is just a roof. And it's that moment where he turns around and it's like wide-eyed pointing up. And I'm like, of course, in my head, again, production guy was like, oh, this is gold. But then I'm also at the same time thinking, what the crap is going on? Because there's no way that there's anybody on top of this structure. I don't even know how you could get on top of it. So, we go outside, we're kind of looking, we're trying to figure out, because we're like, hey, somebody here trying to, prank us or whatever like that. Didn't find any evidence. We know what we heard. Unfortunately, the camera and its particular mic wasn't strong enough to pick up what we were hearing, but the reactions were real. But when we had gone to the filling station to get the snacks, and I left stuff rolling and come back, there is audio of doors slamming. Wow. There is pops next to the mic. There's, like little, not literally sounding like a finger snapping, but it's just that kind of, that you're like, right. I've heard that so many times when we were documenting that it's like, I don't, like, what's making that pop? It's not like, it's not like the wood or something settling. It's just like this pop that may not ever repeat itself, but it's there. And you're just like, all of this stuff was collected. And this was one night, which again, going back to when we started this conversation, it's like you could stay at a place all night and never experience anything. Yeah. This is why these programs a lot of times will stay there for a week, because they're just trying to get enough content to make an episode that has activity.
Something. Let me ask, had any of the people that were there, had they ever described having that same experience of hearing something on the roof?
No, because also they wouldn't stay there. Now, of course, you and I know that this was a tour home. And so, again, would it be the case that most of the activity happened at night? Of course, day or night, it doesn't matter, basically. Some locations may be more active at a certain time. But if there's activity, if there's a misnomer that, it has to happen at night. I'm like, listen, the only benefit to nighttime is things are a little quieter. They're a little stiller. You don't have people hustling, bustling. You may not have traffic noise or whatever. And of course, it looks creepy. But if there's something going on, it's going to happen at any time. But
I bet you those ladies, there's like, you're not leaving without me. We're leaving out here. Right? It's like vampire time before sundown.
Yeah. So they never would stay at night. So of course, the stories that we collected, like from I'm going blank on her name now. I should remember it, basically, because she gave a fascinating interview, but I could see her face. I can't think of her name at the moment. But when she was telling her story of hearing the footsteps, allegedly from Marcus, and also doors slamming, that happened at night, because she had a room, because it was still kind of like used as like, not a halfway house, but I think it was kind of like a little bit of a boarding house, hotel, or something that you could rent rooms kind of thing, and people could stay there, apartments. So she had one on the bottom floor. Okay. And she just distinctly described the fact that she would hear, not necessarily every night, but it only happened at night, the walking, the footsteps, the slamming of a door. She'd come upstairs, there'd be doors would be open, because nobody was staying in those rooms, basically. But she knows that she heard something upstairs slam, which to me I also equally find fascinating when you have reports of stuff like that, and in our case too, we had on actual tape, there were doors slamming, but the doors were open. So it's just like, there's no way that wasn't a door slamming, but then there's no doors that are closed.
Right. And that's the thing. Some noises are, could be like, it could be this, it could be. But there's other things that when you hear it, you know exactly what it is, what you just described. A door slamming.
Yeah.
Like, I know what that is.
There's no question about it. But sometimes like house settling, there's.
That's so ambiguous. It could be like,
Exactly. Because there's a lot of sound, a lot of sounds that can be made. Now, again, a perfect comparison to, I recently, you may have seen the documentaries on the house in between. That there's been a couple of documentaries that have come out on those. Okay. It's a house that's in Florence, Mississippi, and in this particular case, I got a chance to visit with Alice Jackson, who's the owner of that, and again, warm, fuzzy. Alice is awesome. She treats me like family. I'm part of the family now, so that's kind of awesome. But I'm sitting there and talking to her, documenting these experiences, seeing if there's anything that hasn't necessarily been captured in these documentaries. And I hear, along with another guest who's also, her name is Beth, who is visiting, we all hear what to me equates to if I basically took my fist and I hit it on the wall. And this is upstairs. And
Right.
so, and it was loud enough that it's also recorded on my equipment. So to me, that's when you say, again, rationalizing, it's like, that's not a house settling because
Exactly.
that was loud, and it was recorded more than once too. And so then you're just like thinking, okay, so nothing's fallen over, nobody's around beating on the walls.
Sure.
It's clearly more significant than house settling. What is it? I mean, of course, in that case, it's certainly feeling beyond
No,
normal.
you'll hear some people that'll say, "Oh, it sounds like something crashed to the floor, like maybe a chest of drawers or something." When they
Mhm.
run into, there's nothing. In other words, it was such a noise that it's like you said, it's not the house settling. Some people think, "Hey, I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna find a place that's trashed and my furniture's upside down."
Absolutely.
And they run in there and there's nothing. Everything is the same.
Hmm. Yeah.
And why that noise is sometimes part of the haunting phenomena, I still don't understand why. In
Yeah,
some
yeah.
cases.
The noise to me is one of the fascinating things, and I guess that's the difference. I feel like between if someone's just basically looking to content create or someone who's trying to be a researcher or an investigator is just kind of like, why is this? What
Mhm.
what makes in the particular situation, like I step back and I'm like, well, this instance doesn't happen at every location. Like, matter of fact, sure, there can be, you could say, certain hauntings have similar type of experiences. For example, you may have multiple accounts, different locations, there's footsteps,
Mhm.
just as an
Sure.
example, basically. But then you could say an equal amount, there's no footsteps has ever been recorded or documented there. So it kind of becomes that whole like, well, why are there footsteps here and why are there not footsteps there?
Or when are they? Because sometimes you think about it, and let's go with the premise that this is haunted. It's an intelligent haunting
Hmm.
by a ghost that's there all the time. Whatever the old owner, whatever you like.
Sure.
So you're thinking, okay, this ghost is there 24/7, supposedly.
Hmm.
Why is it that sometimes they'll have phenomena, whether it's a smell,
Mm.
visual is very rare. People don't realize it's very rare.
Very.
Yeah, or auditory,
Hmm.
or the presence or like that heaviness. And then other
Hmm.
times there's nothing. And it makes
Yeah.
you think, why? What is it that maybe we're not aware of? Is it on our level that
Hmm.
sometimes it's apparent? You'll get the full, like everything, the full Monty, bangs, noises, shuffling footsteps. It's like, wow. Then you
Yeah.
come back the next day or the next day after,
Mhm.
nothing.
Nothing. And Marlene, that's where I wonder if it's, if it's sometimes the simplest explanation is the easiest, like, or the truest. And
Mhm.
it's like sometimes I wonder, like, this may be kind of sad to say, but I've said this many times. I felt like I'm a ghost repellent because
Yes.
except for the moments that I've mentioned, basically
Yes.
where stuff has happened, a lot of times, things will more often happen if I've left equipment, and gone away or whatever. Or,
Right.
there are moments where I've been poked in the back by clearly what
Yes.
to me would have been an index finger, at least I hope.
Mhm.
Uh, pinky, I don't
Well,
know.
you know what? I've also found that some people say, and this has nothing, by the way, to do with psychic ability.
Right.
Sometimes again, if this is an intelligent entity that's actually there, for
Hmm.
some reason, you remind them of
Mm.
somebody they knew,
Hmm.
good or bad, by the way.
Hmm. Yes.
It could be positive. Let's say that guy used to be a military guy and you were ex-military, and there's something about you,
Hmm.
or that you look like somebody they knew or they hated, which
Yep.
sometimes is why they like. And like you said, this has nothing to do with psychic ability.
Hmm.
And like you said, some people will go to some places and everything jumps when they go there.
Hmm.
And then other times the other person will go and it's like you said, that is a doornail. It's like, all right, okay.
Yeah. It's like there's some type of connection, and we've had moments. Mike and I even recently were at a jail, an old jail that's in Virginia, and we were working with another group, and it's kind of one of those moments where this goes into a bit of a deeper conversation because what I mean is like we were almost getting a little down, like actually like the other group was having experiences and we weren't, and it was almost like two of the women, and the two guys, and it was like the guys were, man, why we're not experiencing anything, and
Right.
literally both of us were like, okay, you know what, this is childish, this is stupid, it's kind of like when you catch yourself reacting a certain way.
Why them and not us?
Exactly. So it's a valid reaction, but at the same time, just like you said, in their case, whether it was they were more open, whether it was there was some type of connection that they were relating to, because what is definitely true is that's why, I've told folks several times, it's like, for example, do not go into a location being all ticked off, or, you're not in the right mind frame. It's like, you need to be like, for us, we have a prayer. We basically, have a process of just like, okay, all right, we're calm, we're cool, we're collected, we're prayed up, we're going in, and that's our routine.
Exactly.
Everybody can have their own routine, but you do that, and you do that every time, because if you come in and if you're sick, or if you had a bad day or whatever. Okay, either A, nothing's going to happen, or the worst possibility is now you're vulnerable.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. And you're vulnerable, and
become a target.
You're a target. It doesn't mean that there's something demonic there, but if there's something that's bad there, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm going to mess with you.
You're the weak link.
You're the weak link. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what wouldn't have normally happened, now you're into your eyeballs up to,
Oh yeah. And and it could be, isn't it? You can, either physically sick, you're super stressed, stuff that happens to everybody. But let's say you're going through something stressful, or like you said, you're coming down with something and you're feeling like, oh man, I'm even physically drained, even if you're not upset or mad, but you're just physically drained. You're coming down with something. Stay home. I would tell it'd be like, stay home, because basically you're going to be the weak link, and they know. And I'm glad you pointed it out. You could have a presence there that when they were alive, they were SOBs or whatever. They died. They're still the same way. It's not demonic, but they were just unpleasant people, or hateful, or bad, or evil people,
Yeah, exactly.
And they haven't changed their ways for whatever reason. And somehow or other, they always know who they can pick on, kind of deal.
Yeah, and that's where, this is where, talking about Mike, it's like I have to tell him, I'm like, you see, I'm going to have to forever use you as an example, bro. And he's like, fine, that's fine. But, a short story, getting into attachments, which again, I feel there's a lot of nuances with all this, but I also think to where this is why I caution folks, especially if anyone's, they want to do this for fun, or they want to do this for the likes or the fame or whatever. It's like Mike, who has been a researcher for decades. It's like he knows better. We were on a live, Darren and I, I'm in Maryland. Darren at the time was in Arizona. Mike was down in North Carolina at a cemetery called the Burying Grounds. Old timey burying.
I was gonna say that name. That's got to be an old cemetery,
right? When you hear the word burying, and that's not something that is used much anymore. It's old. It's 300 years old, basically. We're talking. So there's a lot of history. Mike's in there by himself, with this live stream. That's not a problem. Someone else might be like, would I? Well, there was an owl that was up in the trees that was like starting to hoot, which Mike intuitively thought was strange, but in reality, looking back, that owl was like, hey, bro, you need to get out of here, basically. So you had, that was almost like,
I'm telling you, that's the beginning of a horror flick right there. You're in the cemetery by yourself, and the owl.
Right? And this was a loud, and also he even described it was a big, an average owl might be.
I've got a few owls where I live at. They're real big ones. I got big ones out here.
Yeah,
and I know what you mean. And they sound, when they hoot, you can hear them really well.
And he could. And then I think there was maybe there was something else, but it got to the point to where he could no longer hear the owl or anything else. And if you're talking about like where we started with a change,
Yes.
there was a change. There was rustling that came from some bushes that were in front of him. Visually, he's got his camera, and again, we're live streaming this basically, and he's talking to us. Visually, we can't see what he sees, but he senses that something basically is coming at him through the bushes, and so he hightails it out. And of course, Darren and I are thinking, "Oh my goodness, are we about to see Mike like crack his skull open?" Basically,
But
because
let me ask you, at this point, is he thinking it's a live person, or is he thinking it's something?
he doesn't know, but of course, he's basically thinking like intuitively.
Like, I need to get out of here.
That's like number one, I need to go. But number two, it's like, this isn't normal. This isn't natural, basically. And so he's running. Now, it's dark. Now, it looks lighter on the camera because
Oh my God.
but I'm like, he's tearing through a cemetery. And we're like thinking,
Any minute now. He's
oh
gonna
my
eat
gosh,
it.
he's going to eat it. And it's going to be like, this is going to be bad. But thankfully, that doesn't happen. And we're just like, dude, what's happening? He's like, I just need to get out of there. I just felt like something was coming from me. I needed to go. I needed to leave. And it was just like, dude, hey, thank you for this. Appreciate the investigation, because, we were getting sounds over the spirit box and stuff like that. Nothing that was foreboding. It was interesting, but it took a total shift. Now, to conclude this story, basically, we were at the time working with a psychic artist, Angela Bowley. And Angela,
I know Angela. I've interviewed Angela.
I brought that up because you've interviewed her recently, right?
Yes, she's great.
And so we worked with Angela when we had a live program. So since we don't have the live program, she and I especially stay in touch. But I don't have a format for her as we did then. But Angela, I reached out to, and I sent her a picture of Mike. Like I told him, take a picture of yourself right now, basically. So he just kind of did a selfie. I gave it to Angela. I said, Mike had an experience. What do you see? And so she basically drew out the sketch, and we're going to follow up with Mike by bringing him on a live show to talk about the whole experience. And of course, Angela was going to be on that with her drawing. She shares this drawing with me, and it is the most horrific thing. And you've seen her work, so she draws some pretty crazy stuff. This was to me, the only thing I can think of is like a hag, so like a skeletal face, stringy hair, and kind of like this little dude over on the shoulder, basically with like this weird, almost wide brimmed hat kind of thing. And I was like, okay, what's the story? And she's like, this gal was waiting for him. She basically hangs out there, and he was right time, wrong place. She attached to him. Here's what he needs to do to get rid of her. She had this little friend who he was, there was an accident on a ship, and he got burned and disfigured. And so he kind of like gravitated to be like, hey, I'm going to hang out with her, mom figure or whatever you want to say is a story. I reached out to Mike, and I was like, before we
let me ask you something. So what after he left, did he feel something was with him?
He felt very agitated. He felt very, and that's the reason why I thought that I wanted to reach out to her, and then I said we needed to do a follow up. But it all kind of started to come together when it was like sequence of events was he was agitated, he didn't feel that great. There was all this residual. And he didn't pray up. He just basically went in there, just locked and loaded, basically. He didn't prepare himself.
He's crazy.
And that's where I go back to say he knew better. It's kind of like we all know better, but it's like that one time you don't do what you need to do. This happened, that was the evidence of it. He got rid of it, but then we pulled all this together in a follow-up live program. And again, that was the teachable moment, is like, listen, this is how stuff happens. And this is how sometimes people end up getting like sick for weeks, or maybe they have an illness that they can't shake and they don't know why. And it's like, yeah, did you like go do something and you weren't like, prepared for
Mhm.
it, and you walked into a location or whatever and you were like, whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, I did. And I'm like, well, you have a friend basically,
Let
and
me
you
tell
need
you
to know
something.
your friend.
I'm gonna tell you my own story, and this was in St. Augustine. This was
Okay.
already years ago, and I
Yeah.
had experience. But Colorado Cemetery is the oldest cemetery in St. Augustine.
Hmm.
Okay, as a matter of fact, it was way beyond the perimeter of the original St. Augustine. It was way out there. Of course, now it's in the middle of St. Augustine,
Right.
but anyway, I went by there at night, but of course it was closed, and I wasn't planning to go in. I
Mm.
wasn't really doing anything. I just went. I took some pictures. Oh, Colorado, whatever. Oh, okay. So basically, I wasn't researching. I didn't go in there.
Mhm.
My mistake, of course. And the fence there, it's like iron, iron fencing, grading gates. I
Mhm.
looked inside because there's supposedly there's a story that somebody sees a little boy on the tree, whatever. It's by standards, it's a pretty small cemetery. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff there that doesn't have headstones. But anyway, I was coming from a trip that I had gone up to some states and I was on my way back to Miami and I had stopped there. I was feeling great
Mhm.
until later.
Mm.
When I got home, not home, when I got back to my hotel room, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I feel like so tired.
Mm.
I felt horrible. The next day I was like, when you're so sick, you can't barely lift your head off the pillow.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
much so that I was planning to stay there. Like I think it was 3 or 4 more days, and I just left. I was with somebody. I said, I need to go home because
Mm.
I can't. I'm not gonna. All I'm gonna do is sit here. I can't go out. I felt so bad. I had like the most, and I don't want to say I wasn't running a fever, and it wasn't really a cold per
Right.
se. It was
Right.
just like I felt so bad, and like when I was coming down with something, it took me at least a month to get
Mm.
over it. I was
Wow.
feeling like a cold, but it wasn't like not a fever.
Mhm.
And I had been fine
Mhm.
till then. And then afterwards, and then later on, I've read that, during the time that they were burying people there was a lot of victims of yellow fever and,
Mm.
a lot of other things that, was happening because of the semi-tropical climate there,
Mhm.
and people caught stuff, a bunch of people died.
Sure. Yeah.
But I never thought of it. I knew better, but since I thought I was standing on the other side of the gates of the cemetery, that was gonna be okay, and all I did was take some pictures, and I you know what? I learned my lesson, and I'm not kidding you. I was sick, sick, sick. Like it took me like a month, like a slow recovery. And I'm usually pretty good health-wise, and it
Yeah.
took me like a month to feel back to my normal self,
Mhm.
health-wise, energy-wise, because I
Yeah.
was like laid
Yeah.
out. And people
Yeah.
don't real and that's another thing. People don't realize also, Rick, in cemeteries, besides the obvious thing is dead people, but you know that there's a lot of people that they go and they do spells and invocations and do weird stuff and rituals in cemetery grounds.
Mhm.
All right. And
Mhm.
some of the stuff that's there is not necessarily the dead people that are buried there.
I'm
It's
100% convinced of that. And that's
yes,
where, to me, what I think just makes me cringe every time. And I get it.
yes,
It's almost kind of like a rite of passage or whatever to be like,
yeah.
we're going to go out to the cemetery, whatever. And it's just like, that's that, and this is
Yeah.
something I didn't know this at first. Again,
Mhm.
years and experience gives you wisdom, basically. So I never used to think that about cemeteries. I personally have never, hung out, late or whatever like that. Tried to get
Right.
any type of evidence, and now I have no interest in doing that. But equally, abandoned places, right?
Well, that's
So
another one.
right? Because again, there's a creepy factor, and I like urbexing. I like the
Sure.
concept of, again, if you're preserving history, it's like these are places that either they're going to get torn down
Mhm.
or they're going to get repurposed, but in their current state there's something a little sad and also a little mysterious and also a little bit of a time capsule of a place that used to be brimming with life and now it's
Sure.
not. But when folks go to these asylums and these hospitals and things like that, I we've investigated one location and went into it
Mhm.
very prepared because, again, same concept. You think about a lot of these abandoned places. What happens there? You have homeless, you have mentally
yes.
ill, you have
Yes.
drug use, you may have other type of sexual
Yeah, it could be a place where people either trade, sell, do drugs, you name it.
everything basically.
Uh-huh.
And so again, if you're talking about energy and you're talking about things
Yes.
that are being put out, and you're talking about things that may be attracted to that,
Yes.
it's called, listen, yeah, there may be urban legends, and you
Mhm.
can try to do that, and you can try to, maybe try to investigate that and solve the mystery, but it's also known as, you better have your loins girded. So-
Well, this is and I agree. People don't realize that. Let's say the asylum thing, or like the abandoned. It could be anything. It could be
yeah,
big buildings abandoned,
yeah,
whatever that you could say. Oh, like you said, people that go in there, there's that that saying about like attracts like,
yes,
and you said exactly that. You're whoever is in there doing it, and let's face it, unless you're a ghost hunter, most people that end up in these places are up to no good.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
they might themselves have an attachment and be walking with something very dark.
hmm,
But in and of itself, it will bring in energies that are very, and I'm going to use this word even though it's the loaded word, dangerous. They're malevolent and they're dangerous. They're non-human a lot of times.
yes,
Okay. And it almost like this is the place to hang out because whatever is there feeds off of whatever these people are doing, whether it's the drug use or the crime or even murder in some cases because of who's involved,
yeah,
and you hear even of a lot of legend trippers that it's like sometimes they even find live people. It's like, what are you doing? Are you crazy?
right, right. And plus, these are also the locations, just like you said, with cemeteries. I mean, folks come in there, they try to do rituals. They,
Mhm.
there's conjuring. There's,
Oh yeah.
there's all sorts of stuff, and it again. I think that's where the research and also the intent. Like again, are you
Mhm.
going in there
Yes.
to get scared, to scare yourself, to get scary content, or are you trying to go in there to solve a mystery, to preserve
Yeah.
history, but also, you've done all the work to prepare. I mean, like the one example I talked about, it's an asylum that's called Forest Haven that's in this general area. It has a horrific past, and I think
Right.
that's one of the reasons why I do think it's important to remember, especially when it comes to healthcare and mental health and things
Mhm.
of our history. At the time, there's kind of like two sides to the coin. In one sense, that's all they knew. That's, at the time, that was as much knowledge as they knew how to treat some of these problems.
Right.
But you flip the coin over, and how overrun they were, how understaffed,
Yes.
how underfunded.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so you
Yes.
just have this horrific thing that I don't think we should forget, like so many things in our history. If you forget it, you could repeat it. So it's nice to remember it,
Mhm.
but at the same time realize the stains that has left on that property.
Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, I was doing very recently research on this asylum. It was called Foxborough. It's up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Started out late 1890s
Hmm.
for what dipsomaniacs, which is another word for an alcoholic.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
that's how that's how it started out. That same typical asylum Gothic buildings. Basically, at the beginning they were self-sustaining kind of.
Hmm.
They were trying to make them self-sustaining. Big place.
Hmm.
Eventually, because of the demands, uh, it's really funny because supposedly rich people from Boston would check themselves in, and then later they wouldn't let them out, or their families wouldn't. They had to like get their families to do what they call a writ of habeas corpus
Right.
to get them out. They went in there thinking I'm going to go over to Foxborough and hang out, and maybe they'll treat me for my alcoholism. And then when
Right.
they wanted to leave, they couldn't leave. But anyway, by 1910, the demands of psychiatric, they've basically started accepting psychiatric patients, and they put the addiction people. Opium and alcoholism were the big things they were treating, but they
Sure.
shift them off to, well, come to find out, eventually now they've realized, when they would bury the people, they only had numbers,
Mm,
but all the ledgers and of course everything was written down. They closed in 75. They've lost. Massachusetts lost them somewhere.
sure.
But come to find out, this is what a lot of people don't realize. Some people were dropping off family members
Hmm.
and forgetting about them.
Yeah.
okay, it wasn't like, here's my number if something happens, or not my number, my address, some whatever, call me, or contact me,
Right.
or they would visit. People don't realize, when you hear about these asylum stories,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, a lot of times the ones that would walk away would
Mm-hmm.
be the actual families of origin.
Yeah.
And these people, sometimes they spent their whole lives, depending, I guess, their level of mental illness, whatever it was. And I even found there was from 1920s, that to escapees, a 9-year-old girl with a 20-year-old woman, and no, a 28-year-old woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never thought that they had children there.
Yeah.
And they were not related, by the way. They were
Yeah.
unrelated. But what I'm saying is that everybody always makes it look like the asylums were totally the bad people, like keeping you against your will. It's that sometimes the families themselves
Yes.
would just leave them there because, for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course, then you hear all the horror stories as far as but it wasn't only just like, let's say, and of course they were. I don't think there's one asylum that I've ever researched that wasn't understaffed and had too many patients. All of them across the board.
Yeah, because you
that.
have a facility that could start, and of course they might have to have more buildings. And yeah,
Yes.
and to your point, yeah, it's like it's always easy to blame the system, the staff,
Yeah,
and all
exactly.
of that. And sure, there certainly may have been some horrible abuses of the system and
Sure.
things
Yes.
going
Yeah.
on, but to step back and to realize that in some very sad cases, maybe it was just someone who they had a bit of a learning disability. Maybe
Yes.
it was someone who, ADHD or something like that, basically autism, something that is perfectly normal and can, be managed in a lot of different
can be managed, exactly.
Then
And there was a big also, I want to say even later on, and I'm sure you've heard of it, where parents were told to institutionalize their children, even if the kid, just like you said, had maybe a learning deficit or something that now we recognize they're on the autism spectrum somewhere.
Right.
And they would just blindly institutionalize their kids because they were told even by the doctors, put them someplace.
And it could be the fact that maybe they were just a bit of a bad seed, They were just,
Come on. It's like ADHD.
There was a inconvenience. And so basically, here's this person that's put in there to be, and I'll just use air quotes, of treated. And, maybe the treatment helped. Maybe there's almost a scared straight type of situation. But too often these folks entered these facilities and they never came out.
Yeah. But they never even had, and the thing was that there was nobody to say, I'll be responsible for them. Here, let them out. They can come with me. I'll take care of them.
Right.
And handle them. Nobody, I mean, some of the research, sometimes not all the time. There's been times that I've read where they would notify the family, so-and-so is sick, come and see them, or they've died. Do you want the body? Right. And it was like, the family was nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they left them there. It's like, see ya, bye, I'm out of here.
And it was just a case to forget. And I think that's where, to me, it's what's truly sad is, I mean, you can sit there and try to spin like, oh, this was a house of horrors. And I mean, you're not necessarily wrong, but I think what to me is really more sad and heartbreaking is, and you could even to an extent make the comparison to today's nursing home facilities, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas, yes, there may be a need, a family, and forgive me.
Well, think about it. Now you think of like, well, everybody's working. Mom and dad are working, and everybody's working, and we can't. I understand that, but back yesteryear, which was a lot of times, the wife was at home. In other words, or even other relatives were at home. But again, it was this. You find that a lot, that they basically lived their lives out there. Because they just had no place to go. Nobody would take them, even their own families.
Yeah, it was. Whereas, if, and it's not a comparison whatsoever, but like if today in a nursing home scenario, maybe it's basically to get care that a family really can't provide, or they're not equipped to provide, then it was more of, this is way too much of a hassle, and I'm not
Yeah.
even going to think about visiting. Matter of fact, actually, you don't exist anymore. And
Yes.
so you're here, you're over
Exactly.
there, and
Right.
you're forgotten about. And I
Yes.
remember that there was a clip, and this is going back to, Penhurst
Okay.
Hospital in
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania is one of my favorite places, basically. And I don't know why. It's just a fascinating location, but also it's good that they've been able to save some of the buildings. But it got exposed of what was going on there by a local TV reporter who did this expose. And one of the times he was basically like interviewing some of the patients that,
Mm-hmm.
and you have, and this was interesting to me because another patient was asking a patient, these were two grown men, basically, definitely older men, like, how long have you been here? And I think he was like saying since he was, I want to say 9, uh,
Right.
since childhood, basically, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, hey, so, how often does your family visit you? And he's like, they've never visited me. And
Right.
that patient was like, oh, what? As if, he's at
Yeah.
least experienced that. But here's this other patient who's lived out his life there and has never
Yes.
even seen anyone from his family. And it's
Yes.
just heartbreaking, basically, when you think about it.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I'm saying. Sometimes those asylum stories that it makes it sound like, yeah, you'd be surprised really sometimes who are the culprits that these people basically spent their days under these conditions. And of course, people would they get would dropped off and
Mm-hmm.
and I want to say, unfortunately, sometimes they were forced to hire people they shouldn't have hired,
Yeah.
which then you hear about these abuses and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that because what's the word I'm thinking of? They were not really too picky because they needed a warm body there.
Yeah. So someone who was physically capable of at
Yes.
least having enough strength, because of
Yes.
course you're having to move people or restrain people or whatever like that. So yeah, if you had enough strength basically and you're willing to do it, and then if they quit, then it's like, all right, let's find somebody else.
Well, you know what? And then unfortunately, when they got rid of a lot of they were thinking the communities were going to do something about it, and they never did.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is, and then you ask yourself, well, what's the better option? The people it's a real difficult thing.
Yeah.
The person that at least is there, and
Hmm.
we could do a whole show about that. Like how do you handle somebody maybe who needs to take meds and they don't have anybody to take care of. They really don't have a family of origin.
Right.
Anybody that'll say, hey, take your meds.
Hmm.
Say,
Yeah.
how are
Or
you
even
feeling
just people
today?
being advocates. I mean, I just
Yeah,
like,
an advocate, somebody to like
yeah.
help them out, whatever. It's one of those difficult things. But yeah, that's getting back to that original point as far as asylums. I think that's why asylums are such hotbeds
Hmm.
of paranormal events because it wasn't just because you're thinking all these horrific things, these experiments took place. I'd go, no, it's just because these people that were living there, that lived their lives there.
Oh yeah, and that's where to me, like it's talking about evidence. It's like Penhurst, and I think it's why it's a little special to me is that's the first place I've ever gotten disembodied voices.
You
And what I,
did,
what I mean by that would be, of course, you could technically hear that, but in
right?
my case, and there's a little bit of a report about this that I find it fascinating because it feels like, I haven't really delved into this too much, that iPhones, which we shoot a lot of our, we document a lot of our stuff on
Right,
iPhones, not Androids. So why
right.
iPhones as opposed to Androids can record better audio? I mean, you're getting into the mics, you're getting into technologies, blah, blah. But in my case, I know that that's what I was using. And I was getting B-roll basically at Penhurst the very first time I'd been there. And I was like,
Okay.
I was looking down this. It was between two walls, so it's kind of like a very narrow space, not even wide enough for a person. But I just thought it was visually interesting, brick on
Right.
both sides. And so I'd done this a few times, and again, this is just me doing it. I did a couple of maneuvers like this, and then the last time I went out into the hallway, and then in that, not that hallway, but I think maybe a floor up, there was this cart on wheels, almost. it's kind of big enough almost to be like, the carts at a hotel where you can put your luggage on, stuff like that. It was kind of, silver, and it was kind of similar to that. Visually, I'm sitting there with one hand and holding the camera with the other, just kind of like pulling it just to kind of like move it, and also showing like the wheels were rusted solid or whatever. So that's in, visually what's going on. I review the video later. The first segment with the hallway, I hear something, and everything, I have noise canceling headphones. Everything I record, I will just review it and listen in that. And if I hear something interesting, I'll pull it out and enhance it and scrutinize a little bit more. In this case, I thought I heard something, and I was like, okay, let me listen to that again. And it was a voice, and it was a male voice, and it was saying, and it actually had a bit of a whisper to it. Let's go with him.
Oh,
and I listened to about, I don't know, 100 days to Sunday, and I'm like, I cannot unhear that is a male
I hope
voice.
I'm not the him they're talking about.
Let's go with him. And I'm like, and then the reason I mentioned it is because that was when I had done my last shot, and I was going out into the hallway, and I was like, okay, that's significant. Now let's go back to the cart, and I'm moving that. Same exact voice. Apparently, I had someone who was hanging out with me, basically walking around, and he had said, "Leave that here." And I was, and again, same whisper, no emotion to it, but it was kind of like basically like, don't mess with that. And again, you talking about stuff that you don't always get. I've recorded a few other things that are interesting, but I've never recorded same location, probably 10 minutes apart, complete sentences captured like that. And I was like, that's even more different than an EVP in my case, because that was pretty amazing there.
Yeah, and again, some of these people live their lives out there. And you say, why would they want to hang out there? Because they live there. They live their life there.
It's all they do, right? And it's just like, and you say, again, it's like how we have a fondness for things, basically.
Familiarity, what's familiar.
It's familiar. It's a childhood home, whatever, basically. And it becomes something to return to, basically.
Yeah,
or you're wondering, like, who are you? Or why are you messing with this place? Why are you tearing down my walls, basically?
Exactly. And it's and again, a lot of people, like I said, they misconstrue that asylum thing as anything horrible. In some cases, people lived out their lives for whatever reason there, and this is what they know.
Right.
Yeah,
that's life. That's home. Yeah, absolutely.
But again, like prisons and things like that. Besides the actual, I think that there's a lot of intelligent hauntings. You do get a lot of non-human stuff hanging out there, just because of what happened, even when it was occupied. Yes. It's like, well, I tell everybody, I can. You should tell me just about any old prison, asylum. I don't even have to go and investigate. I can tell you there's probably. You have to be really careful because of what's there lurking in the background. That sometimes, by the way, drove a lot of the behavior of the abusers. People that were there. I mean, things that happened that were never documented, obviously.
Right.
But
yeah, and I think that's something that again, you can't dismiss anything out of the plausibility of wondering why certain things may have happened in a location. Could certainly go back to an influence, and again, everybody wants to run to the demon word, basically.
No, you don't have to go there.
I mean, like for me, there's a spiritual realm. To me, there are angels and demons, but it does not mean just because there is something that's happened that's, that's scary, or that's bad, or a rock was thrown at me and that's a demon. It's like, okay, so now you're putting your emotions and your presumptivity to something that you have absolutely no information on, and that's where I say, do the work. It's like, don't immediately assume something. Do the work, and if you come to the conclusion that it's blank, then great. But if you don't, that's okay too, because we don't know everything. There's no way for us to.
And you know what? A lot of people don't realize also, that, especially the asylums that were built like post-Civil War around that time, that this was around the time that the universities needed cadavers for their anatomy classes.
Yes.
And a lot of these asylums were basically selling the patients after death to, this is not a legit sale, but they had this understanding where, we're going to get some money. We know the family. If there is family, it's not going to come and say, hey, where's my granddad or my uncle or my cousin or whatever. And they would have this. And that's why I tell everybody, half the time, those memorials or those little, whatever the numbers or blocks, you dig there, there's nothing there, because that body ended up in some anatomy class at a nearby university. Right. Guaranteed.
And in some cases, if you're wondering why that university has something going on.
Oh yeah, of course. No, I've heard. Let me tell you something. I've heard a lot of stories coming out from people when they're working, especially the older universities, when they're working in their I guess when they do the dissections and the anatomy and stuff like that. You hear people that have stayed there by themselves. They've had some real groovy experiences, like, huh? They've heard whispering. Like, what are you doing?
Bonus points for groovy experiences. So, see, rock on. So
he's like, hey, okay, I think I'm done here for today. Yeah. Yes, because.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too. Is like, you think about these locations to where, again, if you have enough crazy stuff going on, and again, that's where I find it fascinating, because in one sense you could have this part of your mind that wants to say, yeah, that's logical. It makes sense that there's stuff going on in like morgues and hospitals and stuff like that. But then at the same time, if you have these doctors or nurses or whatever that see things, they're not just going to share that with anybody.
Oh no.
They're not going to talk about that with anybody. And if they do, that's, again, we go back to the anonymity almost of like, okay, I'm going to offload this to you because, even if you're sharing it, you're not going to, narc me out, basically, conceal the identity, but at least I can get it off my chest. And you're also not going to judge me because I know what I experienced, and I'm glad that I'm off the night shift, for example.
You know what? You speak to, I'm going to say nurses, because normally those are the ones that, whether they work in oncology or, where people are in places where people are, or even, where they have like older patients.
Yes.
You'll talk to any of them who spend some, and they'll tell you, oh, we knew ahead of time who was going to be, passing away, either because they started talking to somebody who was there. But a lot of them will tell you, oh, there's a certain shadow that we see or something in a certain room. Like after a while, they all knew when somebody was going to, even if the person wasn't looking like they were going to die, there was certain things that they would be seen that they were like, oh, we saw the whatever, fill in the blank around that room. There was one story I was reading the other day, which was, there's a nurse, she's the same thing, older patients, they had 2 to a room, right? And she's checking on them, and she hears something like somebody in there, like walking around, and so she's thinking one of them has gotten out of bed.
Right.
These are older patients, like so she goes in there. They're both awake, 2 ladies, and they're like, you need to get the I can't remember if he said the guy or the person, and that's in the bathroom. The nurse wakes up thinking, oh my God, did some other patient from another room come in here?
Sure.
And get into the bathroom? It happens. So here she opens the door, there's nobody in there. And she says, if it wasn't for the fact that I heard it too.
Right.
When I was approaching and I heard that like somebody was in there, and she says they were wigged out. The 2 old ladies were like, there's somebody in
right
in the bathroom, and she opens it, there's nobody there. She was like, oh my God. Because they're older. First, probably she wouldn't have heard it. She would have said, oh, they primed each other. They're older. They imagined they had a bad dream. Whatever,
Imagination.
whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could dismiss it and be like, yeah, a lot. But yeah, there's the key is when that individual also hears it, and of course, that's where I know that there are so many stories
Oh yeah.
that we'll never hear
Oh, of course.
because basically the individuals don't want to share about it. I mean, I even think about police officers. Like
Oh
I
no,
know.
that's like a career killer.
Well, precisely. If you're going, but oh yeah, Officer Spooky over here saw whatever. But it's again, we have like an older town. It's called Sykesville. That's
Okay.
about 30 minutes from me, and it's kind of it's one of those we're working together to put like this is either going to turn into basically something that's like a documentary of all these stories, or maybe it's going to be multiple episodes. Hadn't quite figured it all out just yet, but the key that I'm missing is talking to a current officer, because what I have is stories from the past where officers have for example, one was driving down Main Street, of course, small town USA. The carpet's rolled up at like 5 or 6 o'clock. Basically
Yeah.
none of the shops are open, so no one's on the street. This is like at 10 o'clock at night. Nobody should be there. He sees someone sitting down on the curb, which you would say, well, that's not entirely unusual. But at this point, basically, if someone's sitting by there, maybe they were kind of maybe they had their hand in their head or something like that, because I feel like there was a little bit of a distress type of look. You as an officer, you have a little extra intuition to be like, I need to kind of swing back around and check that out. So when he swung back around, nobody was there. And so he's sitting there, he's shining his lights all over the place. And it's one of those to where in that amount of time, short of this person being the Flash,
Yeah.
you should
Exactly.
have seen somebody, you should have seen a bush moving, a tree, or there should have been some type of evidence, and the person was completely gone. And so he's just like, So, and that's almost a story you could share, that you could be, ooh, it's spooky, it's weird, and you're not going to
Yeah.
get judged by it. But that there's so many other things that officers, have encountered, or they've had calls to, or whatever, and they're like, you know what? We're not going to talk about this. No, we're just going to keep this to ourselves.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And this, I still know her. She was, they had the area where the police department, but there was a very small area of Miami. It was like a city within the city.
Mhm.
And they had a scenario where there was a murder-suicide.
Mm.
But she arrived there after the husband had killed the wife, and I think he was gonna try to shoot her, and they kind of like danced around a car, and then he just shot himself on the street. But she had no idea. In other words, she arrived right. Okay.
Sure.
That was a horrible thing. And she says that they were renters, but for some reason, the owner didn't sell the house. And at the beginning, she thought, well, you know what? Maybe they're just waiting for a little bit of time to go by. Maybe the stigma, maybe they think that if they put on the market, it's not going to sell well, whatever. Well, what happens is they started getting 911 calls at the dispatch center. And of course, this is a really small department. This is not like a lot of places. So they usually had one dispatcher, especially at night. And they were getting these 911 calls. Well, it got to the point that they even, because even though the owner maintained it, it was empty.
Yeah.
They even called. This was a few years back where landlines were more common. Like everybody had a landline. They called Southern Bell, which is the one that services the area out there. They're like, hey, do you guys? Because they were thinking maybe there's still like some type of 911 connection on the line, even though it's supposedly not a working line.
Right.
They're telling them, no, there is nothing live there. Sometimes, they'll leave the connection live at the box.
Right.
Even if and they were thinking maybe something here is calling the 911. And it went on. And as time went by, well, at the beginning, they were going out there.
Right.
They were going out there thinking, hey, who's okay. Little by little, it dissipated. But they could never explain why they were getting those 911 calls from that one house.
Yeah.
And
And again, those are the things that you always, again, like find fascinating to kind of unravel when you don't have a connection. There
right,
isn't, there isn't power, there isn't a connection, there isn't whatever, and this
right.
thing is happening as if
Yes.
it's basically in this realm.
And this was
But
she gave
in
me
a
that story because besides that, this was a time period that she was working at nights. And it
Mhm.
was like you said, talk about small town, like everything is after a certain hour, everything is like nothing. Because
Right.
when you would get a 911 call, and after a while they knew the address, it was like, okay, I'll go out there.
Yeah.
She said she was like at some point trying to find an explanation,
Right.
because you don't want to think like, how's this happening?
Sure.
But let's face it, short of climbing on a pole, one of the because I believe the telephone connections were up on a pole.
Mhm.
Short of climbing up there and hooking into the thing,
Mhm.
nobody was making those calls. At least not
Right.
a human agency.
Right. Yeah, but and then even that, like I said,
Yeah.
is just fascinating to me that you would have in essence those ghost calls, and it's just kind of like why,
Yes.
or how, and it's like it's not to be able to explain it. Basically, would be fascinating, but it, the amount of
Right.
effort to unravel that gets into the realm of we're not going to be able to understand the hows and the whys of all of it. Some things aren't meant to be
Yeah.
unraveled.
It was like that. You think, okay, was this whoever was there, the wife, and the one thing she was thinking, if I call 911, one of those, like,
Yeah,
what was the last emotional outburst that
yeah. Is it
happened
is
there?
it just like is it a residual loop
Yes.
that's playing over from one realm
Yeah.
into our realm, basically, kind of thing, and it just keeps going on this cycle or whatever. Yeah,
Right.
which
Exactly.
even those are interesting. Those those repeats like that.
Exactly. I think that all those things sometimes, like you said, you're never going to get an answer or an explanation
Hmm.
as to why. And and I'm going to say this is for the people that are non-believers.
Hmm.
You don't have to go whole hog, but you'll talk to people that really are not looking to have the experience, and things will happen to them.
Oh
And
yeah,
they'll be like, I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't ghost hunting. I wasn't, you know,
right.
uh,
Well, and you've probably encountered this too. It's like most of the time that we've caught evidence would be when you're not expecting it.
oh,
When,
yeah.
for example, I'm giving a stand up, as they would call it in TV terms, basically, you're talking to the
Mhm.
camera, you're talking about the history of a place, and then, I was at a lighthouse, basically, which, those
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
for where you're at, basically, and for me, those have a special place in my heart, basically. But I was there doing a stand up, and I was listening to it. And I'm like, and it's one of those things to where I sent this to like 3 different paranormal investigators. So, because
Okay.
again, in the research realm, it's like don't presume anything. I couldn't figure this out. I actually shared this clip with, I was like, here is the raw. This is completely original. And here's even stuff that I've treated. I heard a female voice.
Okay.
I heard about 3 syllables.
Okay.
None of us could figure out what was being said, but it was very evident that I'm talking. Somebody basically, again, sounding like maybe a young 20s, 30s, if you wanted to try to put an age to
Mhm.
it, said something, but no one could figure it out. And there wasn't, there were people that were close by, but this is again, when you think of audio, this was like right in the realm of the
Yes.
sphere of what that mic is going to pick up. So it was close. It was whether it was
Mhm.
behind me, side of me, off camera, it was in that bubble. Couldn't figure it out. And so again, that's one of those things to where, I a lot of times don't like telling people what something is. Like a lot of times if I have an EVP,
Right, yeah, like, what do you make this
yeah,
out to be? Like,
yeah,
don't prime them.
yeah, I'd rather put it out and say, okay, we think this is evidence. Okay, put it out and let it loop about a few times, and then say, this is what we think it is. Because if you immediately say, like you said right there, what something is, well, now that's the only thing the person can hear. They can't unhear what you think it is. But at least if you kind of have it, as here's something, listen to this a few times. But this was one to where it was like, we caught this. Here's what the other people, have done, but none of us know what this says. Do you think you know what it says? And I can't remember what some people came up with, basically, as far as what they thought they were hearing. But again, that's also fascinating.
It could be, yeah. Sometimes it's like, but it's not supposed to be there, though.
Yeah, it's something that it's like, okay, that's something, and you and I may disagree on what it sounds like because you kind of get into a little audio pareidolia there sometimes. But it's the things like those disembodied voices that it's like, okay, that's 100%. There's you.
You know what? And this is the thing, like you said, at that point, you weren't doing a ghost. You were talking. You were doing a thing. You were not there. Oh, let me see if I can capture something.
Yep.
This one time I was talking to a gentleman. His name is Christopher George. He's out of California. This was a few years back, and in the middle, somewhere in the interview, he mentioned something about his mom that passed away, that her cat, whatever, and we kept going. Towards the end, hey, bye. I review all my audio the next day, everything. I review it. At the end, I distinctly hear meow on the thing. We're still talking, but I distinctly hear meow. So,
and there wasn't a cat there, was there?
He sends me like an email a couple of days, and I go, "Oh, you know what? Your cat came out." He emails me back. I don't have a cat. I don't have a cat either. I have a bunch of dogs, but believe me, no cats. And at that time, I was living in an acreage area where the distance between houses, it's not like, the neighborhood cat by your window. Believe me, there was no cats. Besides my dogs, there was no cats out there. You distinctly heard the cat meow. And I was like, what? Cat? And then I remembered like an hour before, he had mentioned about his mom who had already passed away, that she had a cat. I can't even remember the reference. And I was like, God almighty. What? But it was like, there was no mistaking it. Exactly. That it was a cat meowing at the end of the interview.
Exactly. 100%. And that's where, again, it's almost like, if you think about, hey, maybe we've just all been doing this wrong. And it's like all this other stuff might be great, and there may be great equipment, which a lot of times I think that makes for better TV, because if you have something flashing and going off, it's better. But, maybe if it's just kind of like, hey, if you just weren't even trying. It's like the amount of stuff
when you're not really trying, you're not doing the thing, you'll hear it even from Ghost Hunters, either before or after we've packed everything away, then things start happening,
Absolutely.
You're like, oh, that's great,
right?
That's fantastic. Sure. All right.
And you almost think it's kind of like they're like, y'all were funny, all that work that you were doing and everything. And
it's like, there you go.
That was funny. Now that you're not recording,
right. Yeah. There's a lot of, and like I said, because it's really funny, because you see in some of these shows that that they'll show the poor schlep, the low man on the totem pole, having to sit there for hours and listen to hours and hours of audio to see if they picked up something. You'd be surprised, man. There's some stuff that the really good stuff, you don't even have to, like, you hear it with your own, not all the time, but you hear it with your own ears.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's like, I don't need to go back on the audio. I hope the audio picked it up, but I know what I heard.
That's when it's just like, yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%.
But so let me ask you, Rick, are you working? You said that you were working on something now.
So, basically, my goal, especially when we started this, was to try to have like an episode a month, not unlike what we were doing, originally with the broadcast version of it. But as time has gone on and life has happened, and basically there's been different kind of personal challenges going on with the team and everything, it was just a lot easier to be able to be like, we don't look at ourselves as content creators.
Right.
We're in a way not even necessarily investigators, even though of course we do. I mean, I would prefer to say we're documentarians.
Yes.
And so that feels truer as far as a true self. And so in that case, it's like when we get something ready, then it's quality over quantity.
Right.
And so, and of course, the social networks do not like that. They kind of like want you to feed the beast basically and make sure that
Yes.
you're putting out content to stay relevant. But what I found is like when we focus on individuals who are like-minded and they support what we stand for, it makes for a much tighter, much more
Yes.
real circle
Yes.
because we, like so many people, and you yourself may have done this as well, is you come into this and you want to find like-minded people, and it's almost like
Hmm.
this, I want to like befriend everybody and I want to do this.
Right.
And there's nothing really wrong with that, but what you end up finding out is like there's so many people who they don't think like you do, or they have different motives, or fill in the blank.
Well, I think that a lot of people in this field, to be perfectly honest with you, are really looking for sensationalism.
Mhm. Yeah.
And sometimes there's a lot of this, if you're really doing any of the, whether it's the investigation or like you sent, or just investigating the history,
Hmm.
sometimes it's not really the sensational they're looking for.
Oh yeah, exactly. And in that case, it's kind of like once you get your true self, other people may not have find their true, but it's like once it all kind of aligns, then you realize it's much better to have a smaller circle. And
Yes.
so that's where, like, I've got a lot of different investigations that are in the proverbial can, as we say,
Hmm.
basically, that I that they're there, that I still need to, like, okay, I need to pull this out and I need to, unravel
Yes, you
this
know
and put
what?
it
And it's so
together.
funny, but sometimes it's like, I really want to get to this, but you know that once you get into it, it's gonna demand certain amount of energy, of effort, of research, of whatever,
Yep.
so you're like, okay, I got it here. Eventually, I want to do this, but
Oh
I
yeah.
want to do it the right way when I do it.
Well, exactly, and kind of like, so we have, like, I mentioned Sykesville, and then there's also another one that's on Savage Mill, which is a local mill that was turned into a shopping mall. That again, I've documented so many merchants who had
Oh,
experiences,
wow.
and
See, I love those stories. I love those stories because you see so many. That Foxborough Asylum that I told you, it was
Mhm,
in 2007.
mhm,
The state basically was sold at auction,
mhm,
and they made it into, it was like 93 acres. They made it into a big shopping center with an office complex and then condos. And I
right?
was like, I wonder, because I have a feeling somebody's having some type of experience,
Yes,
because it's like,
100%.
even though the building's been leveled.
Yeah, that goes back to, generically, I think, people would say, well, it's the land. And I'm like, can things be tied to the land? Again, it's like,
Yeah.
it's not out of the plausibility of it. But at the same time, it's kind of like I've posed the question on our socials, how, like, it always seems older properties,
Yes.
that always seems to be where the stories are. There aren't newer ones, and why is that? And of course, people wanted to
Um,
respond, well, it's tied to the land and stuff like that. And I posed it that way, wanting to see what people thought. And of course, so many were like, oh, I've been to new locations that have had this, or it's the land. And it's kind of like, all of that is where I was agreeing to it, because at the end of the day, you can have spirits everywhere.
well,
So,
I think also that when you look at these older places,
mhm.
people back then were not as transient.
Mm,
People would live, families would live sometimes at locations 20, 30, 40 years, or in this cases, if you were an patient someplace, you would live there 20, 30. It's not like now that people live there 5 years, 10 years, and they move
yep,
around.
yep.
Back, I'm going to say, during some of these times,
Mhm,
maybe early 20th century,
mhm.
people would stay. You had sometimes multi-generational. They just stuck it out, you didn't move around as much.
Yeah.
And that's I think is part of that cycle of
Mhm,
why you have those hauntings maybe at the older places. And I'm sure you've heard of sightings where they'll see, let's say, an apparition in some cases, and it'll be high up or down low. And basically they're living on the floor plan of what was there before,
mhm. Yes.
you know,
Mhm.
where maybe there was a door at that wall. There's not a door anymore.
Right. You know.
And later you find out there was a door in that wall at one point.
Mhm.
So it almost makes you believe that they're existing on what was there once upon a time.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that familiarity type of thing.
Yes,
What
yes.
they were comfortable with, and so being able to have all these interviews, and there's that part of me that's like, oh my gosh, this has got to see the light
Let
of
me tell you something.
day.
That one that you mentioned, where you've got all these merchants telling you stories, it'd be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is great.
Mm-hmm. And again, talk about preserving history. Some of these shops, they've closed down. They've moved on further. For whatever reason, they're no longer there. So then I'm like, okay, this is awesome. Whereas someone else might be like, well, they're not there. Why would I ever do it? And it's like, I'm interested in the story because that person
Yes.
experienced it, whether or not they've moved to another location or their business is gone permanently. And again, those same merchants could be like, oh, I really appreciate you, recording that. Is there any way I could have a copy? And of course, I'm going to be like, here's your interview, basically, that kind of thing. But
Right.
like you said, to your point, would be like, I've started this a little bit, of kind of prepping the wheels, so to speak, because once you get into something that large, it's going to eat up the time. Or like I tell anyone, because I'm a video editor by trade too, is like, there are moments when I'm in the zone and it's like, that's when it's going to work, and it may come very quickly or it may come slowly, but if I'm in the zone, it's happening. If I'm not in the zone, you can't force it. I've tried. It's just like it's almost like the writer staring at the blank page there. Basically, when it's time, it's gonna flow, and you're gonna type and write it out. But if it's not, it's just gonna be staring back at you, being like, "What? What are you doing?"
I know exactly. I'm working on a book right now. And I promised myself I said I'm gonna put out a book at least once a year.
Nice.
This book is going on its second year, and it's like, and I read it, and I know it's a good story. But it's like I'm dragging my butt on this because exactly like what you said, you get caught up with other things, but it's like, all right, I'm already there. I just can't close this down. I can't. It's like, it's like,
yeah,
like, oh, shit.
Yeah,
Like
and
I'm
plus,
climbing Mount Everest or something.
and I'm also convinced, as you may be as well too, is like their timing is everything. And so just because you want something to happen, there could certainly be a reason why this isn't the week, this isn't the month, this isn't the year to do that, basically. And you may be like, there's no way that I want that to language and just over there basically anguishing away. But in reality, it's like, well, no, that over there, basically, that month, that year, that's when that needs to happen. And then when it does, you're just like, oh, now I see.
Let me ask something, Rick. Have you had people? I'm going to use the example of a restaurant, but it could be any type of business. Have you had any of them reach out to you, wanting for you to come and identify or find that they're haunted, and you kind of think, I think you're doing this because you're trying to bring in public?
So I was trying to think. I definitely feel like that happened at Channel 12 in Mississippi. Again, I think there's that whole there's a little bit of a different mystique when it's kind of like the local TV station. Again, that was a different time. I feel like now finding stories can also be so difficult because it's really easy to look up stuff and you'll have 50 sites, 50 pages, whatever, 50 links that all say the same thing. Here's this, here's these accounts, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm looking for the one that you don't find replicated.
Exactly. Not that everybody and their cousin had done the story about, and they're basically rehashing it. It's just a different presenter.
It's just like over and over. Or to me, it's kind of like if you want to have all these folks go to this one place just because it's popular, then I'm like, why don't we all just try to share notes and be like, okay, what's actually true? Okay, so again, talking about 6 places had footsteps and 6 didn't. It's just like, all of you guys had footsteps? Okay, well then, wow, that's pretty crazy. Every one of you, caught footsteps. That seems to be something that happens in this place. But to find a story that's unique, I know that there are some groups, and I kind of get a little envious, and but I appreciate the idea that, again, there's that trust and people know them. They'll get the calls. It'll be a residential, something's happening or whatever. They're like, hey, come out or whatever. We haven't had that experience, and that's fine because, again, timing and influence and all like that comes into
Let me
play.
tell you something though. The residential, and I'm going to say, because I do a lot of people know me from people that have been around ghost hunting for a long time know me because I used to work for a foundation in Florida that was a research foundation, and I worked with different groups. I was always like a freelance investigator.
Cool.
So believe it or not, and I found this at the beginning, and I'm seeing a return to it with a lot of residential people that really do believe something's going on. They're very careful, or what's the word I'm using for? Very cautious about calling in paranormal groups because they're afraid that they're not going to maintain confidentiality.
Yep. Absolutely.
I've come across this over and over again where I'll have people call me and we'll talk, and and they'll tell me, oh, you know what? Yeah, because they're very cautious. Like the last thing they want is they don't want their story. How's that? To appear somewhere on social media or in any of this, because contrary to what a lot of people believe, especially the people that really legitimately have something happening, they do not want anybody to know about this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or take it to another level would be, you want to be cautious of who does it, because if they, let's say that they do agree to whatever level of sharing it, then that person turns it into something that it's not.
Oh yeah,
blows it out of proportion.
Oh yeah.
Or they come in with that intent and they make things worse.
Yes, I've heard of that. They've heard of that. They bring in people. Sometimes I'll have people say, well, this was the only group in my area that would come out to where I'm at. And it'd be like, yeah, but they've only been together like maybe 3 or 4 months. And and like you said, they go in there, and because they've watched a lot of reality shows, they think they know what they're doing.
Right.
And in this instance, there is something there. There is something supernatural there.
Yes.
And like you said, it's like after they're gone, and then good luck, because when that homeowner, whoever it is, calls them up and goes, hey, what did you do, man? Things are really crazy here.
Right.
Click. You're on your own, baby.
Yeah. We got
what.
Oh yeah. We've got what we need.
You know what? I got a black figure in a cloak standing at the foot of my bed. What? What? Okay, click.
we didn't do it. Sorry.
But, you want us to what? To go back and what?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is because if you're only interested in the whole sensational, the word that you've used, then it's almost like, hey, we've got it, we've accomplished what we wanted to do, and moving on. But that's why it's kind of almost buyer beware, even though that's another thing. Is like, if anyone asks for money, no. This is not a money making type of thing. So you should never.
It isn't. And you know what? And and the thing is this, Rick. Sometimes, and sometimes, believe it or not, like I said, unfortunately, if you want to look at it that way, the reality shows, the paranormal, they make people believe that it's worse than it really actually is.
Absolutely.
Okay, maybe they just brought home something, a little bit negative. And it's not like a full-blown haunting, or they've moved into a place that has residual energy. I tell people, you know what? You could go to a place, whether you buy it or you rent it, and it's all painted and beautiful and picked up. And then you'll have a room that, unbeknownst to you, this was somebody's sick room. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about somebody with a 2-week cold. I'm saying somebody that had some type of illness.
Yep.
That was, a long time. And they might have even died there in that room.
Yep.
And I'm not talking about somebody that dies overnight, because that was, by the way, I tell everybody, that was the norm once upon a time. People would die at home. Yep. There's nothing really morbid in it. I'm talking about somebody that was very ill for a long time and maybe even passed away there. And then you have somebody move in, and then all of a sudden they start getting weird health problems.
Yep.
It's not an actual haunting as in a ghost. It's that there's like an imprint in the fabric of that place that we can't see.
Yes.
with a person, let's say, that sleeps there,
Mm-hmm.
where all of a sudden start feeling symptoms or things like that. And my point being that sometimes it could be a case of getting a blessing or a smudging. It's not a haunting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they needed to clear
Yes.
whatever was there. But unfortunately, sometimes people always run to the extreme,
Mm-hmm.
of something horrible is here with me and gunning for me or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's more sensational. It's that's how you get the likes and the clicks and the views and everything when you do that. And
Yes.
it's like, yeah, just like you said, it's just like it just needs a purge. It needs some light thrown on. It needs the drapes opened up, basically.
Opened up, and you know what, and
all of a sudden it's like, here we go,
And I tell them, because you know what, there's a lot of, there's a lot of states that have a disclosure requirement, like when they sell a house, if there's been like a murder or a suicide or something like that. Each state has a different. So I think California's 3 years, others have a year. Some don't have anything.
Yeah.
Some they require that if the person asks, then they have to talk about it. Like the real estate. I said, but you know what? There's nothing anywhere that says, hey, you know what? We had a person that was really ill here. This was their room for 3 years. And they passed away in the hospital. So I really am not going to tell you.
Yeah.
That this was a sick room.
Right.
Hello. I'm not, and any real estate agent worth their salt is not going to volunteer that information.
Precisely.
And let you know that happened. So that's why I'm saying that sometimes, I tell everybody, and even, if you ever go into a new place, whether it's a rental or anything, even if it looks all nice and shiny, and even if it's brand new, by the way, which you mentioned that thing about the land, depending on your religious beliefs, smudge it, get a priest to come bless it, somebody to come and say some prayers, even if there's nothing there, just to make it square.
I absolutely. That's what any home that we've moved into, basically. I mean, that's where, reading scripture basically all throughout the house.
Yes, exactly. Go through the house and you read scripture or something, whatever, is your religious belief.
Because you're taking, again, just like the going into an investigation, it's like, it's not saying, oh, there's something bad there. Maybe there's just written, but it's basically you're setting the stage. Or in this case, you're, clearing the stage, basically.
Let me ask you something. How many stories have you heard of people that have ended up in haunted houses? I've seen this numerous times, where the person, the man or the woman, usually the wife, but let's say, they'll say, oh, we came to the house and we loved it. At the beginning, it called to me. It was great. I felt so happy and comfortable. And then, ... it turned dark. It's almost like they were enticed into it. So I'm saying, not every time that you go to a house that's got something where you get that forbidding feeling. Right. You hear a bunch of stories where people loved this house at the beginning.
Yes.
And then, as time went by, things started to happen.
You got more comfortable.
My dream house,
You got more comfortable. The honeymoon season was over.
Yeah, no, it was like, oh, this house is beautiful, but now I'm realizing, God, you know what? I mean, these really bad nightmares, or I'm seeing something, or God, like you said, there's somebody walking up in the attic, and it's not a squirrel. It's like,
right. But there's not a 200-pound squirrel that exists. So
exactly, that's going and walking around upside in my attic. By the way, that I tell everybody, worse than the attic, it's got to be anytime anybody tells me that the haunting was in the basement, I'm like, oh, that's the worst. For some reason, anything that's in the earth, it's bad.
See, and what's so funny too is like, you'll see like the meme, so many people have posted the version where it's like, here's the attic, here's the basement, which is worse?
Exactly.
To me, they're both bad, but I really feel the basement is the worst. because in a way, especially if something is, I mean, let's face it, if something is dark or whatever, basically, I mean,
I don't know what it is about stuff that's surrounded by earth. I don't know. I don't know if it's, and it's really funny because I tell somebody, that I've had instances where it's not really an attic, but people have this, instead of the crawl space underneath, they have a crawl space at the top of, like, in between the actual roof. They'll have like a little crawl space, and they'll hear people, and unless the person's 3 feet tall, like, who's going to be walking around out there? But I've been in investigations where basically a lot of the manifestations also are in, like you said, the attic. Like it's where they hang out. How's like,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
And
is
then you're also like, okay, people aren't normally there. I mean, if you
right.
think about it too, people don't normally hang out in the basement. People don't normally hang out in the attic or crawl spaces.
Yes.
So then it's kind of like, I can be over here and I'm living rent free up in your place.
Right. Yes. Like there's something like it's like if I want to stay out of in the time being between the time that maybe I go downstairs and you hear me walking down the stairs or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that's my place because
Mm-hmm.
if I'm aware of what's going on. Because again, if you go on the premise of if let's say this is a spirit that for some reason doesn't know they're dead and they're just reliving their normal activities when they
Right.
were alive.
Right.
And then that's why you might hear the clatter in the kitchen or something. But then you ask yourself, okay, like exactly what you guys, who lived up in that crawl space? Nobody. This is not part of their normal routine.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't living your life out
Mm-hmm.
in the crawl space up there or in the
Right.
little tiny attic. So what are you doing up there now? Why are you making all those noises?
Right.
Like if you were alive stepping around, like again, there's something there. Like I don't know. It's a big rabbit hole that we could go down. But as far as
Absolutely.
what are they aware of and what they're not, and
Mm-hmm.
you always think of some of these people that are on a hamster wheel of actions. They're living or doing what they did when they were alive, and they're just
Mm-hmm.
maybe they don't even aware of us.
Yeah.
But then in other cases, you see that there is like when you were hearing those voices, they are aware of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah.
responding to you. Like when when the voice said, "Don't move that," or what was that?
Yeah. Leave this
that here.
Yeah. I'm like, if I'd heard that, I would have been, yes, sir.
Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. Stay right here.
We good, bro. It's all okay.
Yeah, it's all good. Don't worry. Yeah, it's funny that some of the things that you come across that it's like undeniable. Like, all right. So, Rick, it has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, see,
And
this is where I was like, I wasn't sure how long we had, but I was like, we could have talked 2 more hours, basically. I mean, this is where I appreciate the opportunity, and it's
on the
always
contrary.
awesome to have like-minded, cool people to meet.
Yeah.
I'll tell people it's like the other unspoken, I guess, type of beauty of this is also getting to meet cool people, basically, because until you have a conversation with someone and be able to break down things, you don't necessarily know where folks are coming from. But this has been a joy. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. By the way, for my podcast listeners, what is your website where people can find you?
So all of the latest videos are youtube.com/unexplained cases. If you go to unexplainedcases.com, that actually has not all of our current, but it even has some of our previous investigations back from the early 2000s.
Oh, that's great. I'll have a link in the credits of the show. But again, I want to wish you the best of luck so you can come back and tell me some more of your adventures because I love it. Let me tell you, and your approach is definitely that's to me as far as the real ghost hunting. Like I tell anybody, call that the dungeon because this is like the basics where basically you're doing the research and going out there and not producing it. In other words, you're going to see what happens.
Yes.
And of course the history.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marlon. I appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, you could tell. I could talk to her for a long time. Because he gets it. He gets it. See, he's been around for a long time. And, I don't always make that comment because it's the best way I know how to delineate the before and after, like BC to AD. Like when you had to develop film, there was no digital film. All right. Landlines. Like when I say that story about, that police department, this was the norm. There was upon a time where everybody had a landline. Yeah, eventually, the cellular phones came in, but still a lot of people kept landlines for a long time. Because first of all, cell phones were more expensive. Even their usage, you could run up a bill real easy. And it's just that people were used to it. And then little by little, of course, landlines now are pretty expensive as it is. And I think, a lot of people keep them on not a lot. Certain people, because if they have somebody, I think, with a medical, that, in other words, that they need to be able to make sure that they can get through, and of course, get 911 out to where they're at, etc. But if you try to install a landline, I believe it's pretty expensive. Yeah. But yeah, in other words, he gets it. He was there around for the transition. And I'm not kidding when I was mentioning to him, like I speak to a lot of people that do, I don't want to say they're it's not paranormal investigations. It's not the paranormal investigations in the way that you think of it. Sometimes it's not even a team. This might be one or two people, okay? And they're called in to work with people who have something going on in their house. Okay, they're not listed anywhere. And usually it's like word of mouth, or in other words, they're not out there listed on paranormal societies. How's that? All right. And so anyway, I speak to a lot of people along those lines, and they everybody's telling me that they've seen an uptick in them being contacted by families. I'm gonna say this not on the like historical or, you know, big, like obviously none of these commercial or historical places. This is residential. People contacting them because they're really afraid of that's what's happening in their house, or what they disclosed during the investigation, or what's discovered during the investigation somehow is going to end up on a TikTok video. And I understand their concern. Okay. And the reason why is, like I said, sometimes I will consult, like I said, if it's something with a Hispanic angle, or ritual beliefs, or certain type of stuff in the background that's found. Either they find it, or they say, this was here at this house before, and they'll call me and, Marlene, what do you think? Have you heard of this? Or what do you know? Or we found this in Spain. Whatever. It's one of those deals. You get to talking shop, and they all tell me the same thing, more or less. It's like, yeah, people now are really being careful. They don't want, forget their house, their identities, their story, to get out anywhere where social media or YouTube or anything. They want to make sure that whoever goes out there is not going to publish this anyway, in nothing. And they say, even if it turns out to be something inconsequential or easily explained, not supernatural, they still don't want, the anonymity for them is like, please, please, please. And it's so funny because when I was doing investigations, we had a form that we would have the homeowner, whoever was requesting, sign off on. All right. And I want to say that a lot of times I don't think that there's even anything in writing, because of the way that they end up coming to help people out. But they say across the board, this is one of the main requests before they get started, is that they need to really reassure them, we are not going to talk anything. Whatever happens, we are not going to talk about it. We're not going to say what was discovered, even if they don't give names, for example. Some people, believe it or not, are afraid, hey, somebody might deduce somehow or other who we are. And you might think, man, that's like a little bit paranoid, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes people get paranoid. It's like the last thing I need, for whatever reason, just because they're private people. Sometimes it's because of what they do for a living. Sometimes they don't want their neighbors to know about it. In other words, and I think this holds true, especially with people who, how's this? How can I say? The way they present themselves, whether it's in their jobs, even if the work is not like anything like super important, like, or even among their neighbors or their it's like, I couldn't believe you believe that. In other words, they've portrayed themselves as not falling for that stuff. So they don't want anybody to know. And they're afraid somebody's going to figure out, hey, were they talking? That kind of deal, because you get that kind of paranoia when you really want to keep your privacy. And once upon a time, this was a given, confidentiality. But my point being, there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, there's a lot of underground investigators working out there with families or with individuals that are not part of a group because of that desire not to have their faces or their house or anything. Even if the group says, well, don't worry, like, like Rick was saying, oh, we'll just film your hands or your feet or, or off in the distance, they get like somebody will recognize my voice, something. So yeah, there's an underground paranormal investigator system out in the US. How's that? And most people don't know about it, but it does exist. It does exist. And by the way, the majority of those cases do turn out to be legitimate. Something is going on there. From paranormal light to paranormal, oh crap. Let's get somebody in here, some reinforcements in here. Yeah. The whole gamut. And like I said, sometimes some people will opt to move out because that's just the easiest thing. But for a lot of people, financially, they can't. And some of them don't want to because, hey, this place that they live at means something to them. And let's face it, even now, let's say, and I don't know, I'm talking Florida, but from what I understand, this is across the U.S. more or less. Going ahead, the housing market is difficult. The rents are up. So if you've got this place, sometimes this is not an option, is my point, where people have to stick it out, but they're enduring something that is making life really, really difficult for them. All right. Or they just need somebody to come and hold their hand and say, let's figure this out. Slow down. What's going on? Talk to me. Tell me what's going on. Okay. When did this start? How did this start? Okay. And, and you take it from there. And believe it or not, that's what sometimes people need. And what Rick said, which is what I agree, that not all the time, but sometimes people tend to isolate themselves when they find themselves in these circumstances. By the way, is the worst thing they could do. By this, I'm not saying, go out and tell everybody that'll listen to you that you have a haunting going on in your house. No, I'm not talking about that, but that the shadow of what's going on basically colors everything they do, and they wig out and they don't go out, and they worry too much about it. And sometimes they just need somebody to come in and say, okay, let's figure this out. Let's find out what's going on here. That sometimes, believe it or not, that's where, like, what is it that they say, the clouds part and the sun comes down kind of deal. But yeah, there's underground investigators out there. For any of you who are into the paranormal, yes, there is underground paranormal investigators out there. And I'm sure a lot of you will understand why there is. And I'm sure there's people out there going, you know what? I get it, Marlene, because if I had to call in a paranormal group to come in here, I'd be worried about stuff like that. If I really had, not because I'd be like a goof, if I really, really was worried about something, I look at the shows all the time, but if I had to be the one on the receiving end of having somebody come into my house and discussing something like that, I'd really think good and hard. Who am I going to bring in? And is there any way that these people that might be strangers for all I know, unless they come recommended by somebody, like I said, word of mouth, that, hey, this is coming from a good source, is not going to spill the beans. And the next thing I know is my face is on YouTube or in TikTok somewhere where these people came in and investigated my house, and now everybody knows what's going on. That kind of shit. Yeah, that kind of deal. So anyway, guys, don't forget to like the videos, share the videos, sign up for my newsletter on Substack. Go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to mppellicer.com. Go to most of all the podcast versions of everything. You can find them either on my website or on Spreaker. All right. I'm all over the place. And I have a lot of fantastic guests lined up, just like Rick, a bunch of other people, new people, returning guests. All right. Talking about all the different stuff that's going on. Weird stuff, regular stuff. And I really like his approach where there's so much in the paranormal. I'm going to get on my soapbox now. Here we go. So much of that's really interesting about the paranormal, which sometimes is very subtle. It's not in your face. Has been since it's been, what's the word? The sensationalism has destroyed it. Okay. There's out there fields of really, whether it's from UFO to cryptids to, the Bigfoot to, of course, the ghosts. It's like, it's been like cheapened. It's been cheapened. Like in other words, legitimate research it's like it's fallen by the wayside because everybody is caught up in the how sensational can you make it? The ghost, it's not a ghost anymore, everything is a demon, you know, everything is the extreme. All right. And it's like I personally think the paranormal and all whatever the subject is under that umbrella of paranormal, a lot of it deserves thorough investigation. And by the way, there's a lot of times where you never understand the nexus or the point of origin for that haunting or that whatever, and you never get a resolution. You will talk to people who have lived in haunted houses or places of, where they work, and they'll tell you all of a sudden it either stopped or just petered out and was gone. And then you'll ask them, well, what happened? Did you bring in somebody to do a blessing? They'll go, no, not really. We were just, maybe we did in other words, they never did anything that was like, okay, we're going to lay down the hammer on the ghost. No, it just little by little, it petered out, and it went away. It wasn't like, oh, it's around, but it's just not active. No, it's gone. And they'll tell you, there was one point that there was something different in my house, something. And you'll even have people who will say, you know what? I didn't realize it till this was gone. That before I used to have like a certain shadowy or darkness inside my house in the rooms. And then little by little, I realized like it was like sunnier, even though I hadn't put in a new window or changed the curtains or done anything like that. In other words, sometimes there is no explanation as to why a haunting or anything stops. I tell everybody, I'm not honestly, I'm not very big into communicating with the dead because it invites them to either stay or you end up dealing with something that is not what it seems like. But I do say to people, don't communicate, but tell them, by the way, you're dead, like leave, bye, go into light, bye-bye, you're dead, And sometimes it's as easy as that. If you have a discarnate, which missed the memo about the I'm dead part, or that you don't feed into the whatever, the negativity or the fear, whatever. And then again, this is me. Sometimes these things, they resolve on their own. And you'll never find out why. You'll never figure it out. Why did it stop? Whatever was here, what happened? Yeah, no. Yeah, that knocking that we would hear, yeah, all of a sudden it just became more sporadic. And then you know what? All of a sudden people realize, well, I don't hear that anymore. Yeah, and then all of a sudden it's like the house it's better, it's different. Something's different, but it's better, like in a good way. Maybe it was just a question of somebody praying for the soul of whoever was there. It's just me making stuff up, but it could be a million things that you will never know any better. And again, same thing. Sometimes the point of origin, like you'll have people live in a certain location, nothing happens to them. It's the same place. Your family moves in and they get everything, the full Monty. And even if we go with the supposition that it's not them, in other words, they didn't bring it with them, it's something that's there. Could be a number of things. You've got, like I said it, let's say whoever was there in life was a real angry person. That was just the way, they were either simmering or boiling over, but they were always mad. All right. The family that lived there before, everybody was very mellow. In comes this new family, and they've got maybe one, hopefully not two, but at least one person in there has got the either simmer or boil personality thing going on. And it like wakes them up like, hey, you're my type of person. It kind of like agitates whatever is there. Okay. And then that's why you will get some families going, what in the world? And then you'll talk to the previous owners, and they honestly, not that they're honest all the time, because some families lie. They'll say, no, we never had anything happen. Or the most they had was like this knock somewhere. Oh, but that was it. That was the extent of it. Oh, nothing. We lived there for 5 years and we never had a problem. No, it's all good. Anyway, guys, don't forget mppellicer.com, miamighostchronicles.com. Sign up for my Substack, and I will be seeing you guys next week. And thank you for coming by and spending some time with me. Till next time, you're all wonderful.